sister and their family for all the vital work they're doing to honour her memory. Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement regarding the position of Thames Water and the proposed recapitalisation package currently under consideration. This government was elected with a clear mandate to clean up our rivers, lakes and seas, having inherited record levels of pollution incidents from water companies. Thames Water has underperformed for 15 years. It has regularly missed performance targets, it has unacceptable levels of serious pollution incidents, and the company is heavily indebted. Mr. Speaker, this situation, which delivers poor outcomes for consumers and the environment, cannot continue. To fix this, over the course of the last 2 years, the company has been undertaking a recapitalisation process to seek vital long-term funding. The government has been clear throughout this period that any investor will need to have a credible and robust turnaround plan, the implementation of which must be monitored by regulators and must restore the company's financial resilience and operational performance. Ofwat, with the support of government, have been in discussions with the London and Valley Water Consortium, a group of Thames Water's creditors, regarding the terms of a proposal. On the 6th of March, the consortium presented their proposal for Thames Water to both Ofwat and government. Ofwat have been continuing their discussions with the consortium since then. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to update the House on the next stage of this process. Ofwat is currently evaluating the consortium's proposal, and as the independent regulator is responsible for making a decision as to whether to accept or reject it. If Ofwat decides to accept the proposal, this would be subject to a public consultation and a court-sanctioned restructuring process. A recapitalisation process of this size is complex and will take time. As the Environment Secretary, I have several duties as set out in Section 2 of the Water Industry Act. This includes protecting consumers, securing the proper delivery of water and sewage services, ensuring that companies can finance those services, and that statutory obligations are properly carried out. Mr. Speaker, today I can confirm that I have sent a letter to Ian Coucher, Ofwat's chair, outlining my early views on the proposal linked to my Section 2 duties. These should not be taken as, nor do they constitute a direction from government to Ofwat. I do not believe, Mr. Speaker, that the current proposal goes far enough to protect customers and the environment. I have three particular concerns about the proposal: the unfair cost to customers, delays to vital infrastructure investments, and delays to environmental improvements. The 16 million Thames Water customers are front and centre of my consideration, and I am primarily worried about the impact on them. There is an expectation in the proposal for customers to fund and therefore bear an undue cost for investment in the company. In addition, I'm not convinced about the proposal's request to reduce performance standards and about the significant delay to vital infrastructure investments needed. This would mean delays to environmental improvements, particularly those related to wastewater treatments linked to statutory requirements, as well as to projects that are important for drinking water safety and supply. I am therefore concerned that the long-term resilience of the water and wastewater systems may not be adequately protected. Mr. Speaker, the government will always act in the national interest, and my priority as Environment Secretary is protecting customers and the environment. We will stand ready for all eventualities. Mr. Speaker, I want to conclude by emphasising this government's commitment to turning around the water sector. In under 2 years, we have taken swift, decisive action, introducing the Water Special Measures Act to raise standards, enforce accountability and make pollution cover-ups a criminal offence, banning more than £4 million in bonuses for polluting water bosses, unlocking £104 billion of private investment to rebuild vital infrastructure, and commissioning Sir John Cunliffe to lead the most comprehensive independent review of the water sector since privatisation. Together, these steps have paved the way for the landmark Clean Water Bill in the King's Speech, which fulfils the commitments we set out in the Water White Paper earlier this year and will deliver the fundamental reforms that are so desperately needed. This once-in-a-generation bill will create a single, powerful water regulator and move away from a system where water companies mark their own homework by putting in place stronger, active supervision. This will strengthen water companies' financial resilience and the long-term stability of the sector, with modernised economic regulation and new powers to drive turnaround where companies perform poorly. Additionally, the reforms will strengthen the consumer advocate to provide a more independent, authoritative voice that can challenge the system, drive improvements in outcomes, and ensure customers' interests are put first. We will also improve water quality by cutting pollution at its source. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we will avoid the situation we are discussing today happening in the future. Our reforms will give the new regulator powers to ensure water companies do not accumulate unmanageable levels of debt. More broadly, they will secure the long-term stability of the sector and ensure that companies are financially resilient. Put simply, our reforms will deliver better outcomes for customers and the environment. And, Mr. Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
Can I first of all thank the Secretary of State for coming to the House at the earliest opportunity to update members before making announcements elsewhere. She is a shining example to her Cabinet colleagues of how this House should be treated. I now must call the Shadow Minister, Victoria Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I first of all echo the Secretary of State's comments and remembrance of her dear colleague Jo Cox. Her loss was felt across the House and across party political lines, and I send all of our very best wishes to her loved ones and her friends. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Secretary of State for advance sight of this statement and for briefing call on this announcement. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, as you know, I've been trying for months to coax the Secretary of State to the dispatch box to explain major events within her portfolio, from their EU handover negotiations to their lack of support for farmers. And finally, she emerges into the light. We all assumed that it would be to announce progress towards resolving the many issues facing Thames Water and their customers. Instead, it is a statement about a letter to the regulator. Now, there is nothing new in this statement. There is no change in the situation of Thames Water, and still no certainty for bill payers. Thames Water has repeatedly failed its customers and the environment with a record of pollution, leakage and chronic underinvestment. The latest figures lay this bare. The company is responsible for around a third of the nation's worst pollution incidents, even as bill payers face steep increases in their bills. And these are not abstract failures. Untreated sewage has been poured into the rivers and chalk streams that local communities cherish, while customers are asked to pay more for less. The priority now must be a financial arrangement that keeps the company afloat and protects bill payers and taxpayers. Now, whilst her government is in chaos, paralysed by the Prime Minister's weakness and the Mayor of Manchester's leadership ambitions, Thames Water continues to fail. If no deal is reached, Thames Water could collapse, again at enormous cost to taxpayers. The Secretary of State has said she does not want a scenario where customers pick up the bill for the company's failures. But when the Conservatives tried to amend the Water Special Measures Act to prevent consumers being on the hook in the event of a company going into special administration and tried to impose a lending ratio limit on water companies to prevent this situation happening again, Labour voted it down. Why? I also remember when, under the former Secretary of State, an investor pulled out of a previous rescue deal, partly due to political risk. In other words, he had talked himself out of a deal. How is the current Secretary of State avoiding the failures of the now Secretary of State for Housing? And there are those who are urging nationalisation, a word thrown around carelessly. In fact, I think I've heard it just now, by Labour backbenchers and by Reform. None of them explain that nationalisation would be extremely costly to the taxpayer, potentially up to £20 billion, which is equivalent, to those who are wondering what that means, it's roughly equivalent to the defence funding shortfall about which we have heard so much in recent days. But there are reasonable concerns about how Thames Water's failures will be managed during the government's restructuring of the sector and the abolition of Ofwat. So please, can the Secretary of State confirm that there will be no downgrade or dilution to the existing penalty regime which has been briefed out into the newspapers? Can she set out what safeguards Thames Water will be taken to ensure that Thames Water remains fully responsible for its environmental and operational failures? How will the government ensure bill payers are not left bearing the cost of past mismanagement? And has the government offered or begun any process to recommend an alternative deal? Public trust in the water industry is already at rock bottom. Ministers have still not explained how investment in the sector will actually be paid for. Indeed, the Secretary of State's predecessor had to admit that the so-called private water industry investment, which I see the Secretary of State's repeated today, is in reality paid for by higher bills. Families already struggling with the cost of living should not become the safety net for a company that rewarded its executives whilst letting its infrastructure crumble. This is an important moment for the government to show that it can balance financial stability with strong regulatory oversight and to put accountability and the interests of bill payers and the environment at the heart of water reform. The government must now deliver on the big promises they made during the election for the water sector.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I just say I'm always happy to receive brownie points, so thank you for what you said. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable Lady rightly says that untreated sewage has been poured into our waterways. Yes, for the long years that her party was in government. When they cut the enforcement budget of the Environment Agency, moved to an approach where water companies mark their own homework, the so-called self-monitoring approach, and I find that she has some brass neck in lecturing us when we saw this series of failures under her government. The reason that we are here today, the reason that we as a government inherited record levels of pollution in our waterways was a failure by the government of the Right Honourable Lady to see what was happening before their eyes. A failure of regulation, a failure of the regulators, and a failure of the previous government. I am proud of what we have achieved in the 2 short years that we've been in power, Mr. Speaker. I am proud of the Water Special Measures Act. When did the Conservatives ever cap polluting water bosses' bonuses? Never. She lectures me about amendments to our Act. Our Act did more in less than a year than they did in 14 years to ensure that we had a fairer deal for customers and a better deal for the environment. She asks about nationalisation. I would just gently say that the special administration regime isn't the same as nationalisation, and she's... Yes, OK, no, I'm just clarifying for the House. I don't wish to have an exchange with her across the ballot box, if I can... dispatch box, that might be at some other point. Dispatch box, if I can possibly help it. There is a difference between the two. Nationalisation would be taking, obviously, ownership by the government of the company, but a special administration regime would be the government financing a special administrator appointed by the courts to run the company. She talks about public trust in our water sector being at record lows. Well, all I can say is that we are clearing up their mess. It was under their government that Thames Water was plunged into unmanageable levels of debt.
Sorry. Can I just say this? Please, just let me hear it as well. We don't need a rum and commentary all the way through it. I make sure that we're listening to you, Kevin.
And I have to say, I'm not surprised that there aren't many backbenchers on her benches, given the terrible record of the Conservatives when they were in power on the water industry. We are taking forward in our Clean Water Bill, which will be introduced later in the session, a once-in-a-generation reform of the water sector that is desperately needed to introduce a powerful single regulator that holds water companies to account.
Chair of the Environmental Audit Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thames Water customers are paying the price for the incompetent regulation that allowed Macquarie to saddle the company with eye-watering debts at the same time that the environmental performance was so disgraceful. And that debt ultimately led to the following shareholders to write the equity value down to zero, and it is those who bought the debt who are now making this proposal. Now, I entirely understand why the Secretary of State would not want customers to receive a service that failed in its environmental responsibilities whilst customers paid higher bills. But what assessment has she made as to whether there actually is a viable business there? We've been told this is the final offer from that company. Is there a viable business there that will deliver a long-term investment within a reasonable cost window for bill payers? And if there is not, then at what point does a public administration become inevitable?
Sarah Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I set out in my letter to the regulator, Ofwat, I am concerned that the proposal will mean delays in environmental improvements, delays in improvements to water infrastructure, and as he rightly said, the cost and the unfair cost being laid at the door of Thames Water customers. He asks about whether it is a viable business and next steps. I would say to him, this is a stage in the process where I have given my early views on this proposal. It is now for Ofwat to decide what to do next, and we wait to see what happens.
Tim Farron, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd start off by associating myself very closely with the remarks that the Secretary of State made about Jo Cox. It's an absolute privilege to serve alongside her in this place, and we still miss her very deeply indeed. I'm also very grateful to the Secretary of State for advance sight of the statement and for the very helpful briefing that I had earlier on. Since Conservative privatisation 35 years plus ago, £85 billion of bill payers' money has flowed out like a torrent into the pockets of mostly overseas shareholders and executives paying themselves unearned bonuses. That money could and should have gone into cleaning up our waterways, modernising infrastructure. Instead, sewage was released into our lakes and rivers and seas for 1.8 million hours last year, over 100,000 of those in the Thames region alone. Instead, 20% of our water leaks out of its pipes before it even reaches our homes. In Thames Water, even worse, it's 25% of that water wasted. And now its investors are asking for more time, for more opportunity to take the money before they inevitably run. The Secretary of State is right then that the creditors' offer is a disgrace. They get to keep making money, and Thames bill payers get to pay even more to keep them going, and they get the privilege of seeing long overdue infrastructure improvements delayed for yet another decade. Mr. Speaker, Thames are taking the mickey. The Liberal Democrats say no more and no thanks. It is clear that Thames Water have failed in their basic performance as a water company, and that gives the Secretary of State all the reasons she needs to place Thames into special administration. So why is she not doing that instead? Her letter to Ofwat is, I'm afraid, a sign of dreadful weakness, that she has to beg an equally weak Ofwat to show a resolve that they institutionally lack. Thames have failed in their performance, so just put them into special administration and then migrate the company to a mutually owned model where the bill payers own the company and call the shots, so that investment does get made, that sewage spills stop, that water leaks cease. And by doing that, she could begin the process whereby all of our water companies are owned not by private equity and overseas investors and not by the sluggish state, but by the people. If she would do that, she would win the favour of people from Whitney to Windermere. Why doesn't she stop faffing about and do that instead?
Thursday.
I'd like to thank him for, I think, his support for my statement today. Slightly half-hearted. Thank him for what he said about he's right to say that there has been serious pollution incidents in different water companies, but particularly in Thames, and that is something of grave concern to the public and Thames Water's customers in particular. I'd point out to him that on the special administration regime, there are two types of SARs. An insolvency SAR is an insolvency process and is for the company directors to determine. A performance SAR, however, would be triggered if a company is in serious breach of their statutory duties or the company breaches an enforcement order that is so serious that it's inappropriate for the company to retain its licence. The government stands ready for all eventualities, including a SAR.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Secretary of State confirm that in the event of a special administration regime, any compensation would be based on appropriate value as set out in the case of Lithgow versus the UK, not on regulated capital value as suggested by the Shadow Secretary of State? For Thames, appropriate value would take account of the 23 billion in infrastructure repairs needed to meet condition P of its licence and comply with its statutory obligation, as well as the 13 billion of dividend and debt interest already paid to creditors, and therefore appropriate value would be nil. The Secretary of State said Ofwat is responsible to take the decision to modify the licence. I urge her to read subsection 7 of 12A of the Water Industry Act. She has the power to overrule.
No State.
I thank him for his question. I think there are a number of questions there. As I've said, there is a difference, obviously, between a special administration regime and nationalisation. He talks about regulatory capital value. He is right to suggest that the price of any company is a complicated matter. But obviously, a special administration regime, the state would look to recoup the investment that it's made on SAR exit, if that was what happened. But in nationalisation, it would be a different matter.
Louis French.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What assurances can the government give today to my constituents across Bexley that the £88 million of investment currently underway in our community to secure our fresh drinking water supply for the next 50 years is not derailed by this announcement by the government, which adds to further uncertainty for Thames Water and its customers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it is right that both the regulator and the government hold Thames Water to account. And I find his question slightly bizarre. I would say to him I would reassure constituents of his and other customers of Thames Water that we as a government will always ensure continuity of service. But I make no apology for making sure that customers are front and centre of my consideration of this proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for her statement? Thames Water are by far the worst for sewage spills, pollution incidents, flooding across overloaded sewer systems, customer complaints, regulatory penalties, the list goes on. A robust, proactive regulator is a step in the right direction, but is it not the case that a company so bad should be taken over by putting Thames Water into special measures so it can start over again and work in favour of residents rather than the shareholders as an example to others that enough is enough?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to say that Thames Water has a terrible record going back quite some years, as I said in my statement, 15 years at least, and he's right to say that sewage spills in the Thames Water area are completely unacceptable. As I said, the government stands ready for all eventualities, including a special administration regime.
Bob Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State is absolutely right to put customers at the forefront here. The problem is, in her statement, she says all of this is going to take rather a long time to do and to unwind. And at the moment, the uncertainty is the real concern for customers, particularly if they're going to be charged extra money on their bills. She has given, obviously, a letter to Ofwat. What changes specifically does she want to see in the deal to encourage her to give her agreement to the deal so that we can actually move forward on this rather than have uncertainty?
Well,
Secretary of State.
Quite simply, I don't want customers to pick up the bill for the repeated failures that we've seen by Thames Water. I hear his concerns about uncertainty. I would like to see this situation resolved.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. If you Google Caledonian Road in my constituency, you'd think it was a river, but it isn't. In the last decade, Thames Water has delivered to Islington 7 major floods. Since privatisation, Thames Water has delivered to shareholders £7 billion. Last year, Thames Water delivered to my constituents 31% increase in the water rates. Residents are fed up, businesses are fed up, I'm fed up, I'm sure the government is fed up. How much more do we have to take before Thames Water is finally given the boot?
I thank my right honourable friend for her question. She is absolutely right to emphasise the appalling record of Thames Water and the impact that it's having, not just on her constituents, but on the businesses in her constituency. As I said, there's two different options for a special administration regime, and we remain open to all eventualities.
Mr. Speaker, 10 months ago, the government appointed FTI Consulting to advise it on taking Thames Water into special administration. Can she update the House of the outputs of that work and how much it has cost to date?
I thank him for his question. We have appointed FTI Consulting in the event that there is a special administration regime. That's the right thing to do in order to prepare for that eventuality and have that contingency in place. I haven't got the figure at my disposal, I'm afraid.
Any bills?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Secretary of State is absolutely right when she says that Thames Water has let down my constituents and Londoners more broadly, with years of chronic underinvestment while paying record levels of bonuses and dividends. I recently visited my local sewage works and saw proposed improvements to increase storm surge capacity on site and improve the filtration levels to clean up our waterways. Will the Secretary of State assure me and my constituents that these much needed improvements which are planned will not be further delayed with ongoing institutional uncertainty about the future of Thames Water, so we can finally turn the page on 14 years of Tory neglect of our waterways?
I thank him for his answer, and I absolutely want to turn the page on the failures that we've seen of this company to his constituents and others in the chamber. I would say to him, thanks to our legislation, that he voted for the Water Special Measures Act. Polluting water companies do not now receive bonuses. He's right to suggest that we need to resolve this situation and make sure that those improvements he talked about, which is why I have put forward my early concerns about this proposal, is I don't want to see such significant delays to those sorts of improvements.
Sir Julian.
It's tempting to say that there's a particularly bad smell about this company, but that would be a statement of the obvious. I have a feeling, though I'm not normally a friend of nationalisation, that this company is on a one-way journey to bankruptcy. If that point ever arises, am I right in presuming that there would be no question of compensation to shareholders for a bankrupt company that eventually had to be taken over by the state?
Thank him for his question. The company remains solvent, but if it were to become insolvent, it would be for the directors to apply to the court for an insolvency special administration regime, and then those questions would be on the table.
West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What reassurances can the Secretary of State provide about basic customer services around, for example, Turnpike Lane Tube Station in my constituency closed since last August because Transport for London cannot reopen it due to the leaks and the problems which Thames Water is far too incompetent to fix? Will today's statement lead to better customer service?
Same State.
I'm really sorry to hear about the circumstance in her constituency, and I'm happy to raise that with the regulator. We need to get that fixed as soon as possible.
Leland Ram.
Mr. Speaker, in recent months, 35,000 houses in West Oxford have had their water pressure cut by Thames Water, some as much as 50%. Veronica in Oseley Island says her upstairs shower is now nothing but a dribble and is barely usable. This isn't a service, it's a scam. And it's my constituents who are having to foot the bill for this service. Their bills were put up last year. So could the Secretary of State explain to them, what are we waiting for? Why can't we just let this failed company fail and start again?
I thank her for her question, and I absolutely understand why she and her constituents are fed up with the poor performance of this company. That is why I have written to Ofwat to express my concerns. I do not want her constituents picking up the bill for this poor performance.
Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for her statement. Residents in Dartford have for far too long put up with very poor performance and high water bills in the constituency. For instance, in terms of performance, it's extremely likely that Thames Water leaks contributed to the collapse of the Galley Hill Road in 2023, resulting in Swanscombe residents being pretty much trapped in their town over the last 3 years. So it's absolutely vital, as the Secretary of State says, that the company should not have their performance standards diluted or protection from fines as a result of the deal that's on the table. So does the Minister agree that any deal must put consumers and environmental protections first, and that investors should not benefit at the expense of bill payers and vital infrastructure improvements?
Yeah, I thank him for the question. As I said in my statement, customers are front and centre of my consideration of this serious issue. The Environment Agency will continue to investigate any pollution incident or any breach of statutory obligations of any water company, including Thames Water, and will continue to take enforcement action against those companies, including fines.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a huge list of complaints about Thames Water across mid-Buckinghamshire, and I'm sure that list is identical for the Secretary of State next door in Wickham, and so I add my voice to the calls for real detail from colleagues on this side about the plan and not just ambition. But in the meantime, there is something that is causing Thames Water and indeed every other water company to chase their tails, and that's their inability to have a proper voice in the planning system, so that when villages like Ickford in my constituency, which already has its sewage pumped away by road in tanker because the system just can't cope, is told you've just got to connect another 90, 100, 150 properties, it's never going to work. So what action can the Secretary of State take in the meantime to ensure that this huge demand on house building and data centres in Buckinghamshire, the water companies can actually have their say and say no when they can't do it?
I thank my neighbour for his question, and like him, I've had complaints about this company in my own constituency. With regard to the broader question that he raises, can I reassure him that when we bring the Clean Water Bill to the House, there will be provisions for more intense regional planning, which involves water companies, local authorities and other stakeholders, so that we can avoid the sort of situation that he's talking about.
Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents have been catastrophically failed by Thames Water over many years, with major floods that have closed local businesses, constant leaks and bursts and traffic disruption, loss of supply, terrible support for vulnerable customers when that happens. This is the consequence of shocking negligence by asset stripping investors, and there is no evidence that Thames Water can recover itself or that it will ever have a credible plan to deliver. So can I welcome the Secretary of State's statement today, and can I ask her for further detail on the timescale for resolving this situation? When does she expect Ofwat to reach a decision on the offer from investors? How will she ensure that following such a decision, action is taken swiftly to bring this scandal to an end, to bring Thames Water back into special administration so that it can be run for the public good and for the good of the environment?
I thank my honourable friend for her question. She's right to raise the impact that this has on local businesses as well as residents in her constituency. I spoke to the chair of Ofwat yesterday evening, as well as sending the letter, and I know that the chair and the board of Ofwat are considering this proposal in great detail, and I suspect that we will hear from them soon.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Enough is enough, surely. The sight of US hedge funds picking over the carcass of Thames Water's pipe network, frankly, is revolting. It stinks. And we are seeing their plan includes $750 million of payments to hedge funds, shareholders, debt holders and bankers. It's completely unacceptable. Thames Water is bust. It is insolvent. Now is the time. Put it into a special administration. It can't meet its financial obligations. It can't meet its performance obligations. I urge the Secretary of State, get on with it, put it into SAR, and then buy it out for £1 and a good deal for the taxpayer.
Well, can I welcome him to the party? It was a long time coming, I think. I don't remember any mention of the sewage crisis in the Reform Manifesto at the last election.
Daniel Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think there's amnesia from some members opposite who forget the asset stripping that happened, which has led to the position of infrastructure failing across Bexley and Crayford and that 30% increase we saw last year. Now, we have tried every option to try and keep this company organisationally solvent, but my patience and the patience of my constituents across Bexley and Crayford is running out, quite frankly. So can the Secretary of State outline how ready we are as a government if we do need that special administration to take this company into that ownership model, because there is, I think our patience, as I say, in Bexley and Crayford has run out.
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I think you know that we have seen really poor performance over a number of years, and I absolutely appreciate his impatience on behalf of his constituents. He is right to express that. One of the problems that we've had in the regulatory regime is that the current economic regulator didn't step in and stop this company being put into a situation where it has unmanageable levels of debt, very high levels of debt. In our water white paper, but also in the Clean Water Bill, as I said in my statement, the new regulator will have new powers and responsibilities to ensure that companies don't get into that situation in the first place.
Sarah Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Communities like Chalfont St Peter have suffered appalling circumstances in recent years, including flooding and sewage bubbling up through the drains. Thames Water has promised capital investment to address these issues. So what assurances can the Secretary of State give that customers won't be asked to pay the price for years of financial mismanagement through higher bills, and that any future restructure or special administration regime won't mean those existing capital investment commitments are lost?
I thank my neighbour for her question. She is right to talk about the problems in her constituency that I know very well. And can I just say to her that the reason that I sent this letter yesterday evening is precisely because of the issue that she underlines, which is that I don't want to see severe delays to this sort of capital investment that is necessary to improve the situation, as she has suggested, and I don't want customers to pick up the bill for it.
Flat-Hands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to echo tributes for Jo Cox, who I worked with when she was at Oxfam. We miss her greatly. My constituents of Putney, Roehampton, Southfields and Wandsworth Town have been let down by Thames Water for years. Tories lost any grip of this and cut back the Environment Agency. In 2025, Thames Water dumped sewage in the Thames for over 107,000 hours. But bills are rising, and I get constant emails from constituents because there's nothing to show for it. They are paying the price. So I welcome the Secretary of State standing up for customers and the environment over this dreadful bill. What would she say to my constituents to assure them that they will not have to pay any more for this investment fund masquerading as a public service?
I thank her for her question. She puts her finger on the issue here, and as I said in my statement, there are three principal reasons that I have sent to Ofwat my early concerns about this proposal, and one of those reasons is delays of the investment that we need to ensure that there are improvements to environmental performance, which I know is an issue of concern across the House, and I don't want to see customers pick up the tab for that delay either.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, isn't it clear that 30 years of the regulatory system has absolutely failed in the face of the greed and incompetence and profit-taking of Thames Water? And surely to goodness it is time that Thames Water stopped being allowed to continue with this disastrous policy, was brought into public ownership, and a public ownership with a difference that includes local authorities, local communities, the workforce rather than the directors who do know something about water delivery, so we can have efficient supply, an end to the flooding that happens in my constituency and others, and the abominable pollution of the Thames and the seas all around this country caused by the greed of the directors of Thames Water.
So State.
I don't always agree with the right honourable gentleman, but can I say on this issue that I agree with him that there's been real regulatory failure here. There's been a failure of the regulators, a failure of the regulation itself, the Conservative decision to cut the enforcement budget of the Environment Agency, a shift towards self-monitoring, which essentially was water companies monitoring their own homework. It's basically like telling Ofsted not to visit any schools. I mean, that was the equivalent of the regime that we saw under the Conservatives. And he's right to say that customers and the environment need to be at the heart of the solution to this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all have these examples of Thames Water letting our residents down. Just last week I heard from one of my farmers who's had Thames Water discharging raw sewage into the ditch next to his fields. It's flooded his fields and contaminated the land, and it's no longer in use. So I welcome the progress from the Secretary of State, but as she acknowledges, more may well be needed. If so, can she reassure my constituents that she will always put the interests of consumers, the environment and also public health first ahead of the interests of investors?
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with her more. As I said in my statement, customers are front and centre of my consideration of this issue, and you know, it's completely unacceptable that farmers are also suffering the consequences of the raw sewage crisis that we've got in our country, and they shouldn't be having their land contaminated. That is their livelihood, and it takes a great deal of work and cost in order to decontaminate that land.
Dr. Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will she guarantee that no taxpayer money will be used to bail out Thames Water or its shareholders?
Well, we have to see. So I have sent a letter to express my early concerns about this situation, and we remain, as a government, open to all eventualities. If there was a special administration regime, which I know some people are calling for, then obviously the government would be financing a special administrator to run this company. That would have to happen because we would have to have continuity of service. If he doesn't want that to happen, he has to suggest an alternative.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and could I thank the Secretary of State for her statement and also for the robust way that she's standing up for residents and for the environment on this very important issue. My constituents are appalled by the sewage pollution in the River Thames, and they are also appalled by the poor quality of customer service offered by Thames Water. We've had numerous breaks in supply, other issues. We had an issue with subsidence, which closed the road in Reading as well. So can she tell me more about the process that we follow by Ofwat and the action she'll take through the Clean Water Bill?
I thank him for his question. And on the Clean Water Bill, the bill will introduce a supervisory regime whereby the new regulator that has more teeth will have a team of people for each and every water company really getting a grip on the performance of each water company and holding that company to account. What we've seen up until now, as I said to the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Islington North, is this shift we saw 15 years ago towards a system where companies were basically marking their own homework. That cannot be right. That is not a good. That is not a proper regulatory system. That is just laissez-faire and letting companies get away with the sorts of pollution incidents that we've seen.
Ellen Maguire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thames Water is in crisis. I thank the Minister for not approving this deal. It's sinking under £20 billion of debt. It's like a leaky ship that can't stay afloat. Last year, my constituents paying on average £203 additional per year. They simply can't continue to pay the price for this failure. So when will the Minister stop pouring money into this leaky ship and put Thames Water into special administration and put everyone out of their misery?
I thank her for her question and for her welcoming the fact that I have sent this letter with my early concerns. As I've said to her, there are two different ways for special administration regime. One is insolvency, which is a matter for the directors of the company and then would have to go through the courts, and another is the performance SAR.
Hello, Donovan.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker, Thames Water is clearly failing its customers and the environment, and I want to thank the government for the action that they've taken this week to be very clear to Thames Water that they will not be allowed off the hook for fines, they will not be allowed off the hook for performance targets, and they must not be allowed to mark their own homework. I wanted to probe her on one specific aspect of their failure. On the Environment Committee, we asked Thames how much they'd spent on all of these legal proceedings to try and avoid a special administration regime. They replied, "We estimate that our legal fees for work done in connection with our liquidity extension transaction as implemented through the interim restructuring plan at the High Court and the Court of Appeal was approximately £67.6 million. That was last June, so I'll be writing to them to ask for an update on those costs. But given that shocking amount being wasted on legal bills, almost 3% of what customers are paying in bills, does the Secretary of State agree with me that Thames Water must be spending their money on fixing broken pipes, not bonuses and not bumper legal payouts?
Yes, we want the priority for Thames Water to be on investing in the water infrastructure that is needed to improve the service it gives its customers and also the infrastructure that it needs to drive environmental improvement.
Dr. Ellicott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Secretary of State has pointed out, Thames Water has 16 million customers. It doesn't serve them, it fails them. 16 million is nearly a quarter of the entire UK population, and they don't get any choice. This is a natural monopoly. We're all stuck with the water company that supposedly serves the area we live in. But what do customers get? Bills going up through the roof, pollution in our rivers and our seas, infrastructure crumbling. Now, the Secretary of State has nodded towards special administration in her statement, which would be an improvement on the status quo, but isn't it time to come clean with the British people, admit the failed privatisation experiment has totally failed, and to take this struggling, failing company back into public ownership where it belongs?
I thank her for her question, and she is right to point out that these are natural monopolies and there is no competition. I don't think nationalisation is a silver bullet in this regard, and I just would point out to her that there are big fiscal pressures that the government is facing with regard to all sorts of other areas, but obviously we stand ready for all eventualities.
It's Waller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thames Water was responsible for a third of all major pollution incidents in 2025. Now their creditors want to jack up my constituents' bills, delay improvements to infrastructure and dodge future fines. My constituents are being failed. So can I welcome the action the Secretary of State has taken today, but urge her to go even further and put Thames Water under special measures?
So State.
I thank him for his question, and it's because of the delays that I'm concerned about to improvements in infrastructure, to environmental improvements, that I have sent this letter to Ofwat. But can I just reassure him on one point? Certainly, in my consideration, I have never even considered the idea that the Environment Agency would let this company off any fines. The Environment Agency will continue to perform their duties in holding water companies to account, Thames Water and all other water companies to account, and enforce against them should they breach their statutory obligations.
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Esher and Walton are facing an average water bill of £658 per year, and yet Thames Water continues to fail them. Sewage is poured into the River Mole, which runs through my constituency. The wreck next to the Esher treatment works, where children play, has had sewage in it. And I told the House last week that there was sewage outside the local primary school in Thames Ditton, as well as the middle of the village. So will the government get a grip on this regulatory and state failure and put that company into special administration and create a public interest company that serves my constituents properly?
I thank her for her question, and I'm really sorry to hear about the sewage incident outside a local primary school. If she wanted to take that up with me separately, I'm happy to follow that up with her. The government is concerned about the underperformance of this company, which is why I've expressed early concerns about this proposal. And she is right to say that we need to get a solution here that delivers for customers and the environment.
Justine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My residents are rightly angry that Thames Water has discharged hundreds of hours of sewage into the River Stort, one of our rare and precious chalk streams. I've raised it in this House before, and Thames Water have told me that their improvement plan won't be in place until 2028. That's clearly not good enough. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that this is the latest in a litany of failures by Thames Water? And what assurances will she give my constituents that she will ensure that the need to protect our precious chalk streams will be a priority consideration in the future of Thames Water?
He's right to say that there's been 15 years of failure and the company letting down customers, businesses in his constituency. Can I just say to him that absolutely, as a member in the Chilterns, representing a constituency in the Chilterns, chalk streams are an absolute priority for me as Environment Secretary.
Ollie Glover.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has been very clear in its support for Thames Water's proposed £5.7 billion Whitehorse Reservoir in Oxfordshire. Given that Thames Water may run out of money within months, what assessment has the Secretary of State made of the risk that a collapse could lead to the government having to bear the cost of that reservoir?
I thank him for that question. As a country, we have failed to build a reservoir for 30 years. That cannot be right. With regard to the specific reservoir that he speaks about, we will have to look at the details, but as it stands, the company is ongoing. It's a solvent company, and it should continue to complete the projects that it started.
Chris Vance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for a statement? And can I also thank my humble friend from Hertford and Stort for raising his concerns about the River Stort, which obviously goes past my constituency as well. And I spend a number of hours running along it, so I know what a beautiful area it is, and it does need to be protected. Mr. Speaker, I can't tell you the number of people, not just in Harlow, but everywhere I go, who raise their dissatisfaction with Thames Water. I thank the Secretary of State for what she's doing to raise standards, but I am dubious that Thames Water will be able to reach those high standards. If they do not, what is she going to do? Because I know that people in Harlow do not want us to be propping up a company that puts their failures, makes their failures hit the pockets of people.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for Harlow for conveying the concerns of his constituents. Did you say Minister for Harlow? Right. Okay. I didn't quite know that we created that position. But can I just thank him for what he said? The government is prepared for all eventualities, and can I just reassure him that whatever happens, the government will ensure continuity of service for his constituents with regard to water supply and wastewater services.
I'm going to take those who've just got Thames Water. So, Clive Jones, I think you're Thames Water.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Residents in Wokingham have endured years of sewage dumping by Thames Water and ever-rising bills, while stakeholders line their pockets. The current ownership model is unsustainable, so will the Minister consider our call for water companies to be mutually owned public benefit corporations, putting customers and the environment first, rather than prioritising the interests of creditors and financial institutions?
I thank him for his question. Having served in the Treasury as the Economic Secretary, I worked on our plan to double the number of mutuals across the economy. More broadly, not just with regard to Thames Water, I'd be very happy to see more mutual ownership of water companies, but the question is how you get there.
Mr.
Speaker, the Secretary of State has made absolutely the right decision in seeking to protect bill payers and opposing giving Thames Water a free pass to continue polluting our rivers. The thousands of hours of sewage spills into chalk streams and their tributaries across North East Hertfordshire that Thames Water have continued to oversee are unforgivable, if not technically illegal. Thames Water are failing in practically every possible way. The level of incompetence is staggering, given they have 16 million captive customers. My constituents aren't interested in seeing them being given any more chances, so will the Secretary of State put an end to this unholy mess and rid us of this
What's the honourable member doing? Come on, Chris, you should know better than anybody.
Rid us of this frankly parasitic company once and for all.
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and thank him also for mentioning chalk streams, which, like our other honourable friend, is something close to my heart, given the chalk streams in my own constituency. He's right to say that this is the biggest water company in the country, 16 million customers. As I've said, the government stands ready for all eventualities, including a special administration regime, and front and centre of my consideration of this issue are the customers that he talks about.
Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My very first letter as a Member of Parliament was to Thames Water, following the unacceptable thousands of hours into the River Vere, one of our precious chalk streams. So whatever the future structure of Thames Water, what guarantees can the Minister put in place that the environmental obligations will be strengthened rather than weakened?
Well, can I first say that, as I said to a previous question, the Environment Agency, regardless of how the situation develops, will continue to investigate pollution incidents and enforce and make sure they take enforcement proceedings against any company, including Thames, who are involved in pollution incidents.
Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In March, my constituents in Northlea and Ensham went without water for nearly 3 days due to the collapse of a major water pipe. They're angry that 1/3 of their bills go towards Thames Water's ballooning debt and to paying voucher funds like Elliott Associates instead of maintaining and replacing ageing infrastructure. My right honourable friend, the member for Witney, was right to challenge further borrowing by Thames Water in the Supreme Court. Does the Secretary of State now agree with Liberal Democrats that Thames Water's financial model is broken?
So State.
Well, as I said in answer to a previous question, what the government seeks to do in the Clean Water Bill is make sure that the new water regulator that will be integrating the functions of Ofwat, the EA, the Drinking Water Inspectorate and Natural England doesn't allow companies to get into the sorts of unmanageable levels of debt that we've seen.
Final question, Charlie Menal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's clear that the Creditors Consortium has material influence over Thames Water, as the consortium is funding the company and bilaterally negotiating with the government. Material influence means the consortium meets the defined criteria of being an ultimate controller. Will the Secretary of State now finally acknowledge this fact and work with Ofwat to enforce it?
Well, can I just say that we are working closely with Ofwat. Ofwat have been talking to this consortium of investors for 2 years. The government has, through my officials, been in discussions with the consortium alongside Ofwat since November. I want to thank all the officials actually who've been involved in these discussions. We need to make sure that we find a way forward that puts customers and environment at its heart.
Right, that completes Secretary of State's statement.